In this episode of Shaping the Future, I'm speaking to philosopher, author, and climate activist Professor Rupert Read. Rupert has organised the Philosophy Public Lecture Series 2021, Bad News is Good News, The Upside of Down. The series seeks to ask if there is any silver lining from the tragedy of COVID and what can be learned in the context of living through ecological breakdown. Here we discuss some of the underlying themes and also what exactly is meant by the term transformational adaptation. Other participants include author of The Great Derangement, Amitav Ghosh, as well as Richard Horton, editor of the Lancet, and Sophie Scott-Brown, Nick Brooks and Joanne Clark. To register for the series, you can get tickets for free from the University of East Anglia website, which I have linked to in the notes. Thanks for listening to Shaping the Future. In the next episode, I'll be speaking with former youngest ever Lord Mayor of Sheffield and subsequent Green Party MEP, Majid about his new book, The Art of Disruption. Do subscribe on any major podcast channel to stay up to date. Rupert, it's really good to talk to you again. Can we start by discussing the role that philosophy plays in the climate discourse, which is generally more overtly dominated by politics, earth sciences, energy, activism, and more recently a lot of psychology too?
Yeah, so my view is that while obviously it's absolutely vital that climate science is up front in the discourses around climate, actually not everything can be led by science alone. There does need to be a political dimension, which is also based in political reality. That connects to an ethical dimension to do with what kind of principles we ought to be following in what we do with the climate and ecology more generally. And that connects in turn to a philosophical dimension. So something which is very important here for me is the precautionary principle, the idea that it's not enough to base what you do in relation to climate on the evidence, because by the time all the evidence is in, it may be too late. We actually need to act ahead of the evidence to safeguard ourselves when the threat is potentially dire and when the evidence is only slowly accumulating. Precautionary principle comes in a way from philosophy and from jurisprudence. That's one aspect of how philosophy is relevant. Philosophy is also relevant in terms of broad thinking about what kind of beings we are, what kinds of worlds we inhabit, what kind of expectations we can have for our lives or for that world. And we'll be touching on some of those kinds of issues as well in the series that I'm going to be running this semester.
On that point of the precautionary principle, we're quite a long way, multi-decades into trying to do something about climate. Well, it was climate change, now it's probably a full climate crisis. And we failed to take any kind of precaution. I mean, everything, if you have a truthful analysis of any numbers, and including our own actions today, we're going in the wrong direction. Do you still, from a philosophical point of view, from your own expertise, do you still see there is room to implement this idea of taking a precaution? Is there still room for that now?
Well, that's a great question, Nick, and you're absolutely right. We have pretty horribly failed to be precautious over the last 40, 50 years. That is something which cannot be undone. Does that mean the precautionary principle is no longer relevant? Well, no, it doesn't mean that, because it continues to be relevant wherever there are limitations to the amount or quality or what have you of the evidence that we have. So a big example which is going to be very important in the coming decade is in relation to geoengineering and so-called negative emissions technologies. There's going to be more and more voices clamoring, saying, oh gosh, yes, the situation on climate is getting quite bad. We'd better put mirrors into the atmosphere to divert the sun's rays back to space and keep ourselves cool, or something like that. Now, the situation is so desperate that we can't rule out in principle or dogmatically anything as a possible response to it. But we should be highly precautious when it comes to geoengineering. It's the same kind of mentality, this kind of techno-fix mentality, which has got us into the problem that we're in. It's that same mentality, in fact, on speed or squared. And what I would argue very strongly is that the precautionary principle should be a fairly decisive reason for not doing let's put it this way, most geoengineering schemes that have been presented so far, at any rate. Here's how the precaution principle works here. The danger is that what people are going to say is, well, look, let's try it. Let's try putting some sulfur particles into the atmosphere and so on and see how it goes. And if it goes badly, we'll roll it back. You don't have evidence, they will say. You don't have evidence that it's going to go wrong. And of course we don't have evidence because it hasn't been tried. You can only basically try it once or at full scale. You could do small scale experiments, but they wouldn't really be a test of what it would be like to change the entire atmosphere of the planet, to engineer the entire planet. That is the idea of geoengineering. So the precautionary principle suggests geoengineering is not the kind of interventions that you want to do unless there is literally no alternative. We ought to be still, even now at this late stage, trying, as for example, Extinction Rebellion have argued, to have a drastic emergency program of emissions reductions rather than reaching for the dangerous band-aid solution of geoengineering.
In terms of these kinds of radical, and it's almost like a social intervention as well, if you're going to adopt a plan like this, because one thing the pandemic has shown us is that we need socially to accept certain realities before we can try and get through it. And people go off on different tangents and anti-maskers and all this, all this kind of stuff. Struggling to get those narratives through seems to be one of the great issues now. We're so polarized. Do you think there is any way that we can de-escalate the polarization and come together? Because I think the numbers do show that most people are really concerned about climate change now. It doesn't matter which country you're in. How can we actually unify that precautionary principle is probably what I'm asking.
Yeah, again, very good question, very important. Again, we'll be touching on this in the series of public lectures that I'm running, which are not just about climate, but also about COVID. Yeah, we do need to seek to de-escalate these kinds of divisions. It's going to be very challenging. There does need to be more respect for science. I actually think that on balance, that respect has grown during the COVID pandemic, which is one silver lining to the disaster of the last year. It's no longer really credible to say, as Michael Gove said a few years ago, I think people have had enough of experts. Everybody now sees that experts are badly needed, and it's really only a very tiny minority, I think, who are resisting, albeit that minority is overrepresented, unfortunately, in the press and indeed in the governing party to some extent. But here's the thing, Nick, actually the kind of philosophical perspective that I would like to seek to bring to bear on this stuff would actually be helpful if it could be applied, because one of the beauties of precautionary thinking is that you don't actually have to have scientific proof and evidence in order to implement it. In other words, the sensible thing, the intelligent thing, the smart thing this time last year was to move ahead of the evidence in relation to COVID, not to wait till it was proven just how bad it could be, just how transmissible it was, just how fatal it was, just how much long COVID there was going to be, but to move ahead of that evidence in an emergency fashion. And those governments that did so, those governments that acted on the basis of precaution, governments like Taiwan and New Zealand and South Korea, they have fared immeasurably better in this pandemic than those governments who prevaricated and waited until the evidence was smashing down their doors and smashing down the doors of their hospitals. Just compare the death figures. I mean, it's truly extraordinary. Taiwan and New Zealand, of course, both island nations like ourselves. Taiwan, 7 total deaths in the pandemic. New Zealand, 26. In the UK now, we're running about 1,000 a day. Okay, the direct comparison doesn't quite work. The UK is a bit larger and does have more connectivity. But the difference between the fatalities and so forth, it's absolutely overwhelming. It's orders of magnitude. And that is a result of the East Asian countries having practiced precaution, while the Anglo-American countries waited till the evidence was pouring in, and that was just too late. And I think that Richard Horton, editor of the Lancet, will be very much addressing this in his lecture in the series on COVID.
The title of the series is Bad News is Good News, the Upside of Down. So many people view climate breakdown as existential. The pandemic has created economic misery, mental, physical health issues, loss of life. Can there possibly be an upside to any of this?
So just to correct you very slightly, main title is Bad News is Good News, ? right? So there's a question there. But yes, what we're looking for is the possibility, at least, of kind of silver linings, of learnings, lessons from these tragedies and disasters and unfolding catastrophes that are defining our time. If any of your listeners are aware of my work, they'll be well aware that I'm not one to underplay the bad news in these things.
Sure.
I've been a very, very strong critic of the government on COVID and equally so on climate. I've been arguing that indeed civilizational collapse is fairly likely. What I'm seeking to do here with this series is say, let's also turn around the telescope and see if we can see any upsides from down. And I think, as we've already seen in this conversation, actually, Nick, there are some. There are things we can learn from one catastrophe to apply it to another. And there are even direct upsides to these dismal events. So if we take the example of COVID again, one thing that seems to be happening, for example, is that more people are turning away from commuting and getting into working from home. And that is very likely to persist after the pandemic. And that will be a good thing from a climate perspective. Similarly, it looks like the air travel system of the world is in serious trouble. And that's actually good news if you want to have a future for the human race. If we see COVID as a moment where we can pivot towards a more intelligently designed, more precautious, more local system, then that will indeed be good news. And one might even say something like that would be the best way to memorialize those who have horribly and tragically died through this, to try to turn this crisis into the basis for a better world that might emerge from it. And in the series, we're going to be looking at this across the climate and ecological emergency, across COVID and across other cases that have some similarities to these. And I'm really hopeful that people may come out thinking, terrible things have been happening, worse things are going to happen, but yet we can actually get something positive out of this, and we'll perhaps end up feeling a little bit less depressed by the whole situation.
Okay, and all the talks look fascinating. I'm just going to ask you about the title of your final session, which is a roundtable that you're taking part in, and it's titled, Can We Adapt Transformatively to Climate Decline? What does adapting transformatively look like?
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that, Nick, because this is a crucial question, and this is a big focus of my own work now. And the roundtable features colleagues of mine in and around UEA who are engaged in the same kind of project. So the basic underpinning assumption here is that it is tragically too late for a mitigation-focused approach alone to climate. As we said at the start of this conversation, we have not applied the precautionary principle. And as a result, we've started to see in the last few years the world's climate spinning out of control. Very, very terrifying events, which are going to continue to get worse for a long time to come. So we have to adapt to the climate decline that is here and that is baked in. There's no question about that, but a lot of people are still only just waking up to that. So the question then next is, well, how are we going to adapt? Do we adapt in a sort of shallow, incremental way, which has been the main way that people have been talking about adapting so far? I mean, things like, do we just simply build higher seawalls and higher flood defenses against the higher floods and higher sea levels that are coming in our rivers and all water systems? Or do we think about trying to do something like that in a way that involves a serious kind of reconception of what the future is going to be like and what our society should be like? So a transformative way of adapting to sea level rise and to the greater likelihood of river flooding would involve things like restoring biodiverse ecosystems that will absorb those floodwaters, seeing how those biodiverse ecosystems, mangrove swamps, wetlands, whatever, can be used maybe to sequester carbon, seeing how they can be used maybe to rewild, maybe to provide new food sources, thinking intelligently about where we situate housing, not putting housing on floodplains, but also going further than that. Let's think about things like houses on stilts. Even floating houses have been tried in some parts of the world at certain times. These would be ways of adapting that take seriously that the way we are living is going to be transformed. The only question is that transformation going to be the kind of intelligent deliberate transformation that I just started to outline? Or is the transformation going to take the form of civilizational collapse? Obviously, it would be much better if it's the former. So transformative adaptation is all about how we adapt to the changes that are here and the changes that are coming in a way that can be beneficial and in a way that can last, rather than making us more brittle and more prone to collapse. It's an agenda that I'm very, very excited about, and delighted that, that it's featuring as part of this series.
It seems to be taking a more custodial approach to how we live on Earth and how we interact with everything around us.
Yes, a more custodial approach, also a more radical approach and a more realistic approach. I think it's got numerous kind of win-win-win dimensions, and I'm optimistic that that transformative adaptation as a way of thinking about what we need to do may start to seem quite commonsensical to quite a lot of people in the next few years, and that's absolutely what we need.
Well, Rupert, thank you very much. The series starts on the 9th of February and tickets are available from the University of East Anglia website. So I'm really looking forward to sitting in.
Great. Yes, see you there.